I know that you are a big proponent of training. You and I have trained together. And tell us a little bit about how maybe your military background influenced your thoughts on concealed carry training, for instance.
Yeah, in the military, got to spend a lot of time on like the M4, became a subject matter expert, and one of the trainers for the units I was in on that platform. And so at least I if nothing else, I came in with a foundational understanding of kind of what it takes to teach people how to do these things, and the fact that you're going to have to also leave them with something they can practice. I think that's kind of those two elements. You want to show them things they don't know. You want to, I think, the personal approach is good in that if you can get right there with them and look at their grip and look at their stance and look at how they are interfacing with the firearm. That's all very important to fix on site at the range there. But beyond what you do at that range, you also need to kind of give them the techniques and some things that they can practice themselves to continue improving on that path. And I think a lot of the instructors that you and I have both been around and trained with, kind of follow that model where it's going to be an up close and personal situation while you're at the range with them. But then you're going to be able to take drills and exercises home with you. I think Dave Spalding, grandpa to both of us, he's been instrumental for me because almost everything he does, you can take home and replicate yourself. His standards are out there. There's kind of no confusion about them. And the practical applications of his drills are well known and easy to understand.
Yeah, I think that's a big point because, I've taken some classes from some very well-known instructors and they were a lot of fun. We're doing some crazy shit, jumping out of cars and doing all this stuff and shooting around vehicles and through vehicles and this and that. It was fun, but there's not a ton of practical application to that course versus some courses I've taken, which are much more mundane.
Yeah.
But they make you question every little thing, like how you grip a pistol, which how long have we been gripping a pistol? And now someone's going to tell us something that's going to make us reconsider that very basic technique of gripping a pistol. So those are the classes that I think are more valuable. Not that your class shouldn't be fun, but it's got to be practical. You have to give the students practical material that they can take home and practice. And you said this perfectly because you're not going to anchor those skills in a 2-day class.
Right.
Nobody's that good. Unless you're already super well versed, then you may be able to kind of immediately apply it. But for most people, going to a shooting class is probably going to be about realizing, okay, here's some things I don't know. And like you said, here's some drills that I could take from this instructor or some advice at the very least that I can take home and continue to practice. Because if you go to a class and you don't practice the skills you learned in that class, it's almost like you didn't go to that class.
Yeah. And I think, there was a time, I think largely past at this point, but we did kind of see the glut of trainers a few years back where everybody was a trainer and opening up their YouTube and their Instagram and everything. And I think the unfortunate side effect of that, while there was some good knowledge being put out, I think there was also this draw to create an entertainment venue to almost put on a show, rather than to teach a class. And some people, again, some of those people had really good knowledge to put out, but maybe as a student, you're kind of more drawn into the theater of it rather than the practical application and the ability to anchor those skills.
Yeah, and to be able to say, I trained with so-and-so, But when you go train with some of these people, and not all of them, but
there's a lot of patch collecting, that's for sure.
Exactly. A lot of these high-profile trainers will have, 40 people in a class. And when you got 40 people on the line, how much of that individualized attention are you going to get? Like you said, like, hey, cam your offhand more or grip tighter with your dominant hand or whatever it is that you're going to say. You're not going to get that. All you're going to get is to meet this guy, take some photos with him, for the gram.
See him shoot.
Yeah. Watch him shoot.
Yeah, watch him shoot
phenomenally well. But another thing too is that a lot of these, there are great instructors. Don't get me wrong, but there are also great shooters who you would think would be great instructors, but either they don't know what makes them so good, or they're not skilled at transmitting that knowledge to other people. So you definitely want to go somewhere where you get some individualized attention, so that you're not just running drills and taking,
Yep.
selfies with some famous dude. And I say famous dude, it's nobody in this industry is that famous. It's
No.
quasi famous.
No, I mean, I think there are there's a couple formats that worked and that have kind of ascended and evolved and kind of proven out over time. And that's like you look at like a gun sight, generally a 5-day format based on the fundamentals. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'm too high speed for that. I
Yeah.
don't need to do draw by the numbers. But the thing is, you do thousands of reps in those classes. So it's a larger time commitment. That is not everybody can do that. Not everybody can take 5 days to go do a shooting course. But if you do, the nice thing is the skills that you are doing there, you do them so many times there that generally they're pretty transportable. Then you can bring them home because you've exercised them enough. I think the other format that really works is kind of that smaller class, 2-day course, even some 1-day courses where you drill down onto certain skills, drill them enough, but also go home with homework that makes sense.
Yeah.
Basically, these drills teach you this and reinforce this. Here's some time hacks or some other standards to try and meet. This is what you can do at home. And I think that those are kind of and generally those ones, there is also support in that you can see those drills from that instructor online also, or they've got a forum, or they've got some other
Yes.
way of kind of keeping in touch with the community to make sure those standards are upheld, evolved, questions can be asked.
And one of the things we have today, obviously, is the ability to communicate with the people that we train with. Whereas
Yep.
that would have been much more difficult, 15 years ago, when you don't necessarily have this dude's email or phone number that you trained with. So now there's a lot of that. And I think most instructors are really good about, if you pay for their class, they're going to get back to you within reason and try to help you
Yeah.
to make sure that you understand their material correctly. Another thing, too, is I think that a lot of us, the tendency is to think that, well, I already know that. Like, so you talked about gun sight and the 250 pistol course, for instance. I already know that. I've been shooting for a long time. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I think Dave says this. Just because you're bored with something doesn't mean you're good at it. Right. Right. So how many times have you or I taken a
Yeah.
course from Dave? I've taken so many Dave Spalding courses that I almost know, okay, well, here comes this. He's going to talk about this now. But it's because I learn a little bit more every time. And just because you have a cursory knowledge of something doesn't mean that you've anchored those skills to the degree that you may need them in a defensive situation.
Yeah.
And also the complicated part is, not only do you have to anchor all these different skills, whether it's reloading, controlling recoil, conducting a malfunction clearance, shooting from an atypical position, you have to be so good at that stuff that in the heat of the moment, you're able to focus on your adversary and not shooting from a kneeling position or reloading your pistol. And so you have to really train to that level of what they call in law enforcement, and I think military as well, unconscious competence, right? Where you're almost automatically doing things the right way. And that comes only through practice and repetition.
Yeah. I've never taken a foundational course or a essentials course or a course that I had taken before. I've never taken the content multiple times and found myself coming out slower or worse at it.
Yes.
Generally, because you have that familiarity and you've built in some of that competence, it allows you to think of the next levels, the next pieces. I'm not drawing by the numbers necessarily while they're drawing by the numbers. And if you go to a place like Gunsight and you go multiple times, basically you'll get a pat on the shoulder from one of the instructors that says, okay, you got it. You keep doing what you're doing. It's all good. They are not trying to slow you down. They're trying to make sure you have those fundamentals, because once you have the fundamentals of the draw, well, then it's like, then you can start working on things like the fast acquisition of your sight picture, the controlled press of the trigger. You can work on all those other steps because you've got the one down. And I think it's not just the draw, presentation, and shot. It is any skill in this arena where if you are getting better and better at the fundamentals, then you get to start improving your skills at the more nuanced pieces or the more difficult pieces or the more advanced techniques.